Few in the United States were aware that next door to the Vietnam War in Laos, the CIA was running a full-blown military operation, minus most of the U.S. armed forces. It was the so-called secret war. The Communist Pathet Lao, with the backing of Ho Chi Minh's North Vietnamese army, were the enemy. Hmong, Khmu, Lao, Mien, and soldiers of all ethnicities defended Laos, with the help of some very powerful and secretive friends.
The war was run by the CIA and the State Department.
The secret war became a model for future war operations carried out by the CIA. The clandestine war in Laos killed tens of thousands of Lao citizens. Among the hardest hit were the Hmong of northern Laos.
North Vietnamese was using Laos as a staging area to resupply, and Laos was supposed to be neutral. No one is to touch the country of Laos. And so the United States basically said, okay, so if North Vietnam is going to play this game, we can do the same thing. And instead of using our own troops, right, that we can use the indigenous people. Military forces can't be there, but they send CIA advisors.
CIA operatives like Jerry Daniels worked hand in glove with General Vang Pao. General Vang Pao was Hmong, an ethnic group much persecuted by the dominant culture. They were sometimes called barbarians, or Male, a holdover from the Chinese who chased them out of their country. The United States and General Vang Pao essentially ran the northern part of the secret war together. They were a powerful team.
We Hmong people didn't know why we were in this war and for what reasons. General Vang Pao sent word to the village heads to recruit soldiers. When we got to Padang for training, they taught us how to use knives and guns and told us that we were going to fight in the war. There were two goals. One goal was to protect the country from the Pathet Lao. The second goal was to help the Americans, but we didn't know why we were helping them.
In South Vietnam, the U.S. fought conventional war tactics, and then the communists fought guerrilla tactics against the U.S. In Laos, it's completely opposite. The communists had the conventional war tactics, and then the Hmong used guerrilla tactics against them.
Soldiers were desperately needed, so training was a hurried affair.
On the third day, we learned how to shoot the 60 and 81 and throw grenades. We learned the basic training for 3 days and then went to war.
While the special guerrilla units were in the midst of unforgiving hand-to-hand combat, air support and aerial assaults piled up more damage against the North Vietnamese and Pathet Lao. Radar and satellite tracking were crucial to air operations. Only in recent years has the U.S. acknowledged an isolated installation called Lima Site 85. Lima Site 85 was run by the U.S. Air Force, the only place in Laos where Air Force personnel are publicly known to have served during the secret war. More than half of all bombing operations against North Vietnam were guided by Lima Site 85. Since 1961, the secret war had swallowed northern Laos. Losses were heavy on both sides. The Paris Peace Accords were signed in 1973, ostensibly putting an end to the war in Vietnam. Next door, General Vang Pao was pushing hard to continue fighting. The communist North Vietnamese and Pathet Lao had not let up. But a corner had been turned. The U.S. wanted out of Southeast Asia, and that included Laos.
Finally, they signed the Vientiane Peace Accord on February 21st, 1973.
The two sides, the communists and the royal Lao government, were to jointly rule Laos with a third group, neutralists, providing a middle ground. All were to be equal 50s. But the North Vietnamese and the Pathet Lao were secretly making plans to forcibly take the country. It was mid-May 1975. Saigon and Cambodia had both already fallen. General Vang Pao was said to have known that they were coming. He was ready to stay and fight, but the CIA ordered him to make a clandestine escape to safety in Thailand. While General Vang Pao's escape was meant to be secret, word got out. Those who could made their way to Longqing in hopes of getting a flight to safety too. Grandparents, cousins, aunts, and uncles were gathered together to make the trek through the mountains to Longqing.
It was very chaotic during that time. And when we got there, it was several thousand people were all waiting there. And then soon, the plane started to come. And then it landed, and then people were just like, little did we know that those planes were only reserved for military officers. When the plane landed, and they said, this is Colonel Sandang Xiong's airplane. And so my dad said, okay, if it's Colonel Sandang Xiong's airplane, then let's go. And so they pushed us, and then my dad pushed us. My mom got in, my brothers got in, I got in, and then they closed the door. And it was like sardines in that C-46.
The communist forces took over Longqing on May 15, 1975, and seized power in the capital of Vientiane just 3 months later. As one war ended for the Hmong, another began. The communists had declared that the Hmong were to be hunted and killed because they worked for the much-hated United States. If they surrendered and cooperated, they would be sent to seminar or re-education camps.
Indoctrination, torture, deprivation, food deprivation especially, where you're giving, just very minimal rice and water, called in daily to be beaten, psychologically tortured, where they would pull the gun to your head, like Russian roulette type of things, and you never know when the bullet is going to hit you, and if you survive it, then they take you back to your barracks, and the next day starts over.
Rather than surrender, entire multi-generational families spent years hiding where they knew best, in the dense mountain forest or in remote villages on the highest mountaintops, like Pumbea. Always on the move, alert for the next phalanx of communist soldiers. Whether families surrendered or hid in the jungles, the ultimate goal was escape. Groups of people and sometimes entire villages crept through the forest, evading the enemy on their way out of the mountains to the lowland riverbanks of the Mekong River. Many Hmong did not know how to swim, and with a fast-moving river as wide as 2 miles, many people drowned.
So my father say, okay, chop down as much bamboo as we can carry, come back, use that, as floats. Put 2 poles, in triangle like this, and it fit another pole, and it fits right under your armpit.
Even tiny things, like crying babies, were a mortal danger. Silence meant survival.
As we got closer to the Mekong River, everyone in our group agreed that we would be unhappy with anyone who had a crying child, which would have given away our location and gotten us killed. We didn't give opium to the older 2. We gave opium to our youngest one, who was about 16 days old. After we crossed the river to Thailand, she did wake up.
Not everyone was lucky. Children and the elders were especially vulnerable. Over 50,000 Hmong were estimated to have died trying to get into Thailand, more than were killed during the war. Survivors were taken to temporary camps to wait for permanent placement in a refugee camp. Each family was assigned a tiny living space with virtually no privacy.
There were many people living here. There were the educated, wealthy, and poor people here. We all lived here together. We lived in poor conditions, no bathrooms and bad hygiene. Living here, there was a lot of illness and death. Everyone was faced with death and loss.
Some families spent more than a decade in the refugee camps. Children were born there. People married. Neighborhoods were created, all the while waiting for their names to show up in the list of families approved to leave. And even then, it wasn't simple.
Our name came up twice. We didn't want to come. Family was divided into 2. It was my parents, right? And then it was my grandma and grandpa and my aunts and uncle. So if we were to leave, what's going to happen to them. Finally, my dad decided, okay, let's go. So we came on October 12th, 1976.
Hmong soldiers are not considered U.S. veterans. They receive no veterans benefits, even though they were paid by the American CIA.
I don't know why it's so difficult, why we're caught up in this bureaucratic paperwork. We served the United States of America. We died protecting Americans' interests. Why the feet dragging and the closed lips? This is 41 years later.